From the Tennessee Valley Weather Channel, this is Forecasting Space.
Hey folks, happy Friday and welcome to Forecasting Space, the show with me, your host Chase Wilson, where for you space nerds out there in the weather viewing community, we talk about all things space, from interesting news that's happened recently and this week, some interesting news that impacts us locally across the area. First things first, let's start with that is Space Command moving to Huntsville. Indeed, after a long and storied battle with Space Command being in either Colorado or Huntsville, well, Huntsville has definitely won out in this decision. President Trump announced on Tuesday that the U.S. Space Command will be located in Huntsville, this reversing a Biden-era decision to keep it at its temporary headquarters in Colorado. Now, Colorado does have a history of being home to the Air Force Space Wings. The 45th Space Wing, for example, is based out of Colorado Springs, and it's definitely been a very, very reliable asset. Certainly no political sniping will come from me. I love our friends over in Colorado Springs, but I am very proud, I will admit, of my city to be home of Space Command. Trump mentioned on Tuesday in the speech that the city, now known as Rocket City, he said, but of course we've been known as Rocket City for decades, will be home permanently of Space Command. And in a lot of ways, this does make sense, logistically speaking, right? If you think about it, this is home to the Space and Rocket Center. When you drive through 565, you see the Saturn V there. And of course, we're close to, say, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. A lot of the military and aerospace industrial capacity is based here in Huntsville. And of course, we have Blue Origin manufacturing rocket engines, for example, for the Blue Origin New Glenn rocket and for the ULA Vulcan rocket, which itself is built just a few miles away in Decatur. So not only will the Space Command now be close to its assets to deploy satellites on launches, it is also close to the rockets that will do those launches. Of course, a lot of talk has been made about Vulcan becoming a national security launch payload provider, but that's another point entirely. I digress there. Nevertheless, we very much are excited, I'm sure, here in the Tennessee Valley to see a little bit of a boon to our economy and our new folks to come in from Colorado. Hey, you know, whenever you come here, hey, tune in to Tennessee Valley Weather. We'll keep you updated on this forecast if you're from Colorado. The weather here's a little different, but hey, we'll treat you just fine. We are nice and friendly. Southern hospitality, am I right? So hey, give it a round of applause here for Huntsville. I certainly am proud of my city. In other news, on August 26th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, Starship Flight 10 successfully took off from Starbase, Texas. This was a magnificent success, certainly the most successful launch of the V2 series of Starships so far. Of course, a lot of the headaches that have been caused recently with V2 were in orbit, attempting to get into orbit, or during re-entry. Of course, in past launches, we've seen the spiraling out of control. We've seen engine control lost, even in the last launch, for example. Fortunately, none of that this time. Now, on ascent, they did lose one engine, but that is well within the margin of error. The booster recovered from that just fine. Now, the booster was not returned to catch. They were not doing that this time. They were actually testing engine out capability, ironically, on descent. That passed with flying colors there in the first stage re-entry, and then Starship went into orbit. Of note, Starship actually deployed some test Starlink payloads out of its Pez dispenser door, as people in the kind of in the know call it. Funny little name there, and that was pretty successful too. I noticed while those Starlinks were getting deployed, a couple of them did nudge on the door and start spinning a little bit, but that's nothing a little engineering can't fix. And of course, the big ticket item, re-entry. This was always tricky, and you know, for pretty much any rocket, this is tricky. You're exposed to thousands of degrees Celsius temperatures on re-entry. You're going 17,500 miles an hour. That's why they're testing this so rigorously. This has been the bane of their existence in some aspects for a while yet, but it made it through again with flying colors. We did see a couple of anomalies on re-entry. Of course, we saw the burn through on the aft flaps. We've seen some key points here that have repeated issues, right? We've seen before at the precipice of flaps, at the hinges, that they have been melted away and knocked around. So this is not too new here, and I'm sure SpaceX is working on that. We also saw a high pressure event, something of an explosion in the bay of their engines around when re-entry began, around 60 kilometers, so perhaps a little bit higher. Fortunately, it did not appear to affect anything as far as re-entry and relighting the engines was concerned. This might have been a COPV. Who knows, really? We're not seeing too much indications as to what that was right now. But like I said, the engines restarted, relit, flipped, and landed perfectly in the Indian Ocean. So even with those wings being damaged, even with that explosive decompression of some sort in the engine bay, it managed it. So this is definitely proving to be a very robust, very reliable, and very sturdy re-entry vehicle. I think this is going to start to accelerate from here, especially as we don't have any launch license investigations to do now that there weren't any near launch failures. So I'm optimistic that the Starship program is only going to get better and better from here. In other news, we're still watching the Comet 3I Atlas, which 1 month from now will fly by Mars. Now, of course, Mars is not Earth, so why do we care about this? Well, Europe's Red Planet orbiters will be ready to take a peek and see what it can see from Mars. Of course, there are satellites out there orbiting Mars. Those are in play. ESA has several Mars orbiters, and they're going to attempt observations of the interstellar object during its passage through the solar system. Space.com reported recently. Colin Frank Wilson, project scientist for ESA's Mars orbiters, confirmed that they are going to try, no word as to whether or not it will be successful, we got to try it out first, to observe this comet with its Mars orbiters. He said earlier this week, we can confirm that we are planning to observe 3I Atlas around the time of its closest approach to Mars. This is predicted to occur on the 3rd of October 2025, and on this date, the object will still be approximately 30 million kilometers from Mars. Now, 30 million kilometers, that is a long, long ways. That's better part of 15 to 16 million miles, if my rough mental calculations are correct, give or take. And it's not going to be exactly easy to see that with telescopes and cameras not designed for it, but you know what? It's worth a shot. In situ resource utilization of sorts, you can call it that. This is definitely making the best of what you got, trying to do what you can with what you got. So we'll keep a very close eye on that. I've been very invested in this story because it's not every day you get to see an interstellar visitor and just kind of suss out what it's like in other solar systems. Perhaps we can still learn some information yet about the composition of this comet and see what our neighbors are like, as opposed to just what it's like here in the solar system. Well, that concludes this episode of Forecasting Space. Thanks for tuning in, space nerds, and of course, we'll keep an eye over the next week to see what interesting things happen in the world of space, astronomy, and more.